You're listening to Real Life, No Filter, where raw emotions and real moments take center stage. No masks, no filters. Just honest stories about life, love, and everything in between. Get comfortable. We're about to begin. Mid-March, late afternoon. The sky hung with the leaden weight of clouds, from which wet snow mixed with rain was falling. Underfoot was a slippery, muddy mess, causing passers-by to lose their balance constantly. Eleanor Vance stepped carefully, attentively searching for a place to put her foot. Falling and breaking something was the last thing she needed now, in addition to all her troubles. Hospitals had already become her second home. What could she do? Years take their toll, and the diagnosis didn't promise anything good. Turning around, the elderly woman saw the smiling face of a young woman, tall, slender, with fiery hair. Of course, Eleanor Vance recognized her, although perhaps her surname was different now. A former student. 3 years ago, Eleanor Vance had graduated this class and retired. They stopped, exchanged a few words. The former teacher was always pleased to hear about the successes of her students. Here was Lydia, a student of finance and economics, and she also worked part-time. Smart girl, hard worker. They parted ways. Lydia hurried on with her business, and Eleanor Vance headed towards the shop. The potatoes had run out, and fresh bread wouldn't hurt. She would buy a little of everything. How much did one person need? Before Eleanor Vance, like all her colleagues and friends, was constantly on diets. But now she could afford an extra bun or candy. But the taste of food had lost its former charm. And in general, life had changed beyond recognition. Headaches became a constant companion almost immediately after retiring. The send-off was solemn, at a table set in the school cafeteria. Words of gratitude were spoken. Each colleague recalled something good. It was a little awkward, but touching to the point of tears. At the time of her departure, Eleanor Vance had just turned 60. It was scary to part with the team, to leave the walls of the school to which she had devoted almost 40 years teaching history. But what choice did she have? Children falling behind the curriculum, who were increasingly difficult to reach. In short, Eleanor Vance didn't wait to be asked. Sensing that things were heading that way, she wrote her resignation herself. For a long time, the newly minted pensioner got used to the new way of life. At first, she woke up at 7 in the morning, getting ready for work, and only then remembered there was nowhere to go. She lay back down, but sleep wouldn't come. Then Eleanor Vance would go to the window and watch the hurrying people. Adults rushed to work, children ran to school, and she felt like she had been thrown overboard from this life, finding herself on its sidelines. "You're talking nonsense," cut in her old friend Nancy in response to her revelations. "Life only begins in retirement. Enjoy your well-deserved rest." Nancy herself had retired a couple of years earlier, but couldn't understand Eleanor Vance. Nancy had a husband, adult children, and most importantly, grandchildren, 5-year-old twins, Peter and Mary. The parents worked, and raising the little ones fell on the grandparents' shoulders. So Nancy had plenty to fill her days with, someone to care for. How could she understand Eleanor Vance? But having her own children somehow hadn't worked out. However much the woman was treated, however many doctors she saw. Her husband, Victor, being chief physician of the regional clinic, had the means to arrange a consultation with any luminary. But nothing helped. So Eleanor Vance remained childless, both she and Victor. How many children in the world were unwanted by their own parents? Eleanor Vance had seen plenty of such children during her years of working at the school. On the surface, the family seemed prosperous. The child dressed and shod like a doll, but it was clear they lacked parental warmth and attention. Eleanor Vance and Victor would have been happy to raise Elijah, make him happy, show him the world, raise a kind, good person. But the stork never came to their home. For a long time, Eleanor Vance couldn't reconcile herself to the thought that she would never be a mother. She didn't give up immediately. She fought to the end until her health started to fail. Then, at the first warning bells, her friend Nancy, who had a complete family, didn't fully appreciate her happiness, as is often the case with happy people. She took the gift from heaven for granted, and even complained to Eleanor Vance periodically, now about her lazy son, now about her fashion-conscious daughter. While friends with children, if they wanted, could go on a trip, or if they wanted, they could lie around all day watching TV after a hard work week, with no homework, no children's clinics, no endless clubs and sections. And still, Eleanor Vance suffered. She wanted to give love and affection to a loved one who needed it. And lonely old age was frightening. It would come someday, and there would be no one to give her a glass of water. And then came the realization that everyone has their own destiny. Eleanor Vance's was like this. Not the worst, to be honest. She had a loving husband, comfort, a beloved job. It was to her work that the woman gave her all, both heart and soul. At school, there were always children who needed her help. Seeing such children, she tried to notice their problems, support them in difficult situations. Some, besides her, had no one to rely on at all, and they were so vulnerable, so defenseless. The stories of her students still surfaced in Eleanor Vance's memory in the minutest detail. Here, for example, was Kyle Smith. Everyone had written him off. The director himself predicted the boy would end up in prison. Teachers refused to teach if he was in the classroom. Kyle was bullied from all sides. All he needed was a heart-to-heart talk with someone who would understand, who would pity him. Eleanor Vance became that person. Kyle had problems at home. His father drank, lashed out at the children, beat his wife. Eleanor Vance understood that Kyle would be destroyed in such a family. She used all her connections and got the difficult but very smart boy into a cadet school. Boarding school, strict discipline. All this did its job. Now Kyle, who was considered a future criminal at school, holds a leadership position in the Ministry of Internal Affairs, is married, happy, prosperous. And to this day, he doesn't forget to call his favorite teacher, visits to thank her once again for her role in his destiny. Or Eliza Jones, a quiet, withdrawn girl who couldn't even open her mouth at the blackboard. She got low C's. They were given for her quiet, trouble-free behavior. Little Eliza had a degree of cerebral palsy, so she stood out among her peers, walked a little awkwardly, her legs would occasionally cramp. Eleanor Vance felt sorry for Eliza, and she started paying attention to her. And somehow she opened up. It turned out Eliza was a person of unusual depth and understanding for her age, a little sage. Eliza confided her secret to Eleanor Vance. She secretly wrote poetry, but didn't show anyone. She was shy. Eleanor Vance helped Eliza believe in herself, and also introduced her to local poets. They appreciated the girl's talent, took her under their wing. Now Eliza is the author of several books and the head of a literary club at the local university. She found herself and no longer seemed quiet and withdrawn. Eliza is a real star. There were such happy stories in Eleanor Vance's life, but it wasn't always possible to help. Here, for example, was Catherine Miller. A thin, tall girl with long hair the color of ripe rye, a real Russian beauty. Fair skin, bottomless blue eyes, regular features. Kathy. This girl had serious problems at home. Kathy's father had either died or run away many years ago. The girl didn't remember him. Since then, her mother dreamed of sorting out her personal life. She was a young, striking woman who changed boyfriends like gloves, and it would be fine if she just changed them. She trailed after them all over the country, dragging the child with her. Kathy came to Eleanor Vance's school in the 8th grade. She never stayed longer than 18 months, all because of her mother's urge to change places. Kathy's mother worked as a hairdresser, a profession that allowed her to easily find work in any city. And she could also work unofficially, doing jobs at home, which she often did. Kathy had to move to this town because of her mother's new suitor, another stepfather. He was a long-haul truck driver, met Kathy's mother by chance in a bar and took her home with him. Eleanor Vance noticed immediately that Kathy's life was difficult. She had a keen eye. She had seen such children, sensed their trouble. She started watching the girl. Kathy kept to herself. Nobody bullied her, but she didn't socialize with anyone either. She avoided talking to the girls, tried not to participate in school events. The girl stayed at school late. She sat in the library, reading, doing her homework, clearly putting off the moment of returning home. One day, Eleanor Vance stayed late at school. A parent-teacher meeting had run long. When they dispersed, it was already dark. Eleanor Vance noticed a lonely, hunched figure on a bench in the yard. The sensitive woman immediately understood. Someone was in trouble. She approached closer, looked carefully. Kathy was sitting on the bench in the school garden. Seeing Eleanor Vance, she was initially flustered, embarrassed. The teacher managed to get her to talk. She understood what the girl wanted to hear and feel. She saw. She needed the involvement and sympathy of an adult, strong person. Kathy spoke little at first. She was shy. And then she slowly opened up, told about her life. The teacher, who had seen a lot, learned something terrible. Her mother, whom Kathy couldn't stand, had more than once blamed her daughter for her failures in her personal life, because supposedly it was hard to find a good man with a child. And Kathy's mother's men were varied. There were indifferent ones who didn't notice the girl. There were also aggressive ones. The current stepfather constantly found fault with Kathy. Everything she did was wrong. He shouted at her mother too, sometimes hit her, especially when he drank. Eleanor Vance discovered a terrible thing. Kathy didn't want to go home. That's why she stayed late in the library. And when it was warm, she wandered the streets until night, or sat somewhere until the very last minute, and then returned to the apartment. Nowhere else to go. With an aggressive man and a perpetually irritated mother, Kathy felt she was unwanted by anyone in the family, that she was just in the way, that everyone would be better off without her. The girl poured out her soul, and tears streamed down her cheeks. Eleanor Vance hugged Kathy, said something comforting and felt angry. She was angry at Kathy's mother. This woman didn't appreciate the gift of fate at all. Such a wonderful girl. Beautiful, sensitive, capable. She didn't study very well, it's true. But it's not surprising. When was she supposed to do her homework if she tried to get home when everyone was asleep, so as not to be in the way? This is what she learned with her mother, not to provoke rudeness or even punishment. And she became even more attentive to Kathy. A warm, trusting relationship developed between them. Sometimes after lessons, the girl went home with the teacher. It was quiet, peaceful there. She could prepare for classes. Kathy even improved her grades. Victor, Eleanor Vance's husband, was shocked. He initiated a check by Child Protective Services. He thought maybe this authority would at least hold the careless adults accountable, force them to care for the child. But the check concluded that the family was prosperous, renovated, a separate sleeping place, a full refrigerator. Eleanor Vance choked on this lie, from the disconnect from the sad reality. But what could it be? Kathy didn't write poetry, couldn't sing, didn't want to dance, wasn't interested in crafts. Eleanor Vance couldn't find what would help Kathy endure. The girl needed strength to grow into a normal person, to grow stronger, to become independent. Kathy transformed from an awkward girl into a pretty young woman. She still had no friends among her classmates, but she started socializing with guys from a nearby college. Eleanor Vance watched her student closely. She feared that circumstances would push her onto a slippery slope. She talked a lot with the girl, told her about the dangers facing teenagers. Essentially, she was doing her mother's job. "Little Kathy," she would nod, promising not to do anything foolish, and each time thanked Eleanor Vance for her involvement. "You do more for me than my mother," Kathy sometimes said. "Nonsense," Eleanor Vance objected. "Your mother feeds you, gives you drink, clothes you, and you warm me." Eleanor Vance saw that Kathy was drawn to her, listened to her opinion. And yet she worried about her very much. Who knows what might happen? Little Kathy was at a difficult, dangerous age, and the only significant adult in her life was her history teacher. It shouldn't be like that. And then Kathy disappeared. The evening before, she had visited Eleanor Vance. The teacher was happy, invited her to the table. The girl had supper. They talked a lot, laughed. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. And only before leaving, Kathy suddenly handed Eleanor Vance a locket. Inexpensive, but pretty, silver-plated costume jewelry. "This is for you." "Thank you very much. A lovely little thing. But there's no holiday, is there?" "Take it anyway." "Thank you, Kathy." Kathy left. And only then did Eleanor Vance realize that the locket opened. Inside was a photo of Kathy. The picture was clearly recent. The young woman smiled cheerfully at the camera, looking like a photo model. A beauty. Eleanor Vance was happy with the gift. She perceived it as a sign of attention, of care. A teacher, a sensitive, delicate girl. A grateful teenager is a rarity. And yet, this gesture seemed strange and unsettling. And the next day, Kathy wasn't there. She didn't show up at school. She wasn't at home either. Her mother late at night. But this time, it was clear that something extraordinary had happened. Kathy, being a minor, was immediately searched for. It was no joke. A 16-year-old teenager was missing. Wanted posters were put up around the town. There were many theories. They said she had become the victim of a visiting criminal. But Eleanor Vance was sure. Kathy had simply run away. Perhaps not alone. The young woman knew she was leaving the day before, and the locket with the photo was a farewell gift. Eleanor Vance told the investigator about this detail, but he didn't take her words into account. He dismissed them. The leading theory was kidnapping. Kathy was never found. Her mother, after some time, met a new suitor and drove off with him into unknown distances. She, like Eleanor Vance, was sure. Her daughter was alive. She had just run away somewhere because she didn't want to study, and they forced her at home. She found a boyfriend and was enjoying life, youth, freedom. Eleanor Vance never heard about her student again, although she tried to find out her fate several times. The very locket remained as a keepsake. It was kept in a jewelry box. Sometimes Eleanor Vance would take it out, open it, and gaze at Kathy's cheerful, beautiful face. Where was this girl now, who was no longer a girl at all, but a grown woman? What had become of her? For some reason, it seemed that such a flight couldn't end well. Eleanor Vance blamed herself for not stopping Kathy that evening, not asking about her plans. After all, that unexpected gift had made her wary. But the girl, she looked happy then. Yes, truly happy. It was strange, but gratifying. Eleanor Vance thought that perhaps the young woman's life had finally improved, for a joyful spark shone in her eyes. And look how it turned out. "You can't save everyone," Victor reassured his wife. He saw how his wife suffered from guilt. "I know. Things like this happen in the hospital. Trouble, it just happens. Even if you did everything to prevent it. There's nothing you can do about it." Eleanor Vance understood. Her husband was right. But she was still tormented by thoughts of Kathy. The worst thing was the uncertainty. She so wanted to believe that things had turned out well for this girl. But it was self-deception. What good could happen to a runaway teenager unwanted by her parents? Victor. Beloved husband, best friend, closest person. So intelligent and serious, strict and responsible at work, tender and kind with her. With Eleanor Vance. They had been together since they were 20. They met at an amusement park while they were students. They never parted until death separated them 7 years ago. Victor held a leadership position, chief physician of the regional hospital. Nerve-wracking, responsible work. He was loved and respected for his professionalism. Victor loved his work, and Eleanor Vance understood him. She felt the same way about her own work. And so Victor passed away right at his workplace from a sudden heart attack. So many doctors nearby, and they couldn't save him. "Trouble just happens," Victor had once said. And so it happened. Trouble. Eleanor Vance fell into apathy. Perhaps only work pulled her out of it then. At school, whether you wanted to or not, you had to keep going. Students and colleagues distracted her, gradually bringing her back to life. And then retirement. And she felt completely alone and unwanted. She hadn't imagined this time like this. They planned to travel. They had the money. Her husband was serious, responsible, and had opened a savings account long ago. The money was accumulating for their happy old age. Only Eleanor Vance's old age turned out not to be so happy. 2 years after retiring were spent in adjustment mode. No notebooks, no school bells, no answers, no meetings, no New Year's parties or cheerful holidays. Eleanor Vance thought about a dacha, getting into gardening. But she realized in time that she couldn't manage the plot alone. If Victor had been here, it would have been different. Instead, the woman created a real conservatory in the living room. Flowers weren't just on the windowsill, they were everywhere. Eleanor Vance's personal home garden. There were even 2 birch trees in tubs. The woman enjoyed caring for the plants. They, like children, also needed care, attention, and love. Eleanor Vance stopped to catch her breath. Such walks were already difficult for her. The insidious disease was making itself known. And what next? Doctors made it clear. There are no miracles. The condition would only get worse. How hard it was at such a moment not to have family and loved ones nearby. Her head had ached before, so at first Eleanor Vance didn't pay attention to the alarming symptoms. Her head would hurt, she'd take a pill, and everything was fine. Then dizziness and nausea were added. Migraines became daily. Then the elderly woman went to the hospital. All procedures were prescribed: tests, ultrasound, MRI. The verdict sounded like a bolt from the blue. The tumor was inoperable, rapidly progressing. Nothing could be done. The only thing doctors could do was relieve the pain. "And how much time do I have?" the woman asked, looking the doctor in the eye. "Tell me honestly. I have no one. I need to finish my affairs myself, do you understand? I must know how much time I have." "Well, it's hard to say how the disease behaves. I think a minimum of a year. Maximum, in your case, no more than 2 years." A year. Only 2 summers, 2 New Years, 2 birthdays, at best. Only then did Eleanor Vance realize how much she, it turned out, loved her life. Even such a life. Childless, lonely. She became scared. Truly scared. At first, she had trouble falling asleep. She kept thinking about the approaching end. And so, a year passed. The last months of Eleanor Vance's time on this earth began to flow. The woman got used to this thought. It no longer frightened her as much. Eleanor Vance knew. When things got really bad, she would go to a hospice, under the care of doctors. They would take care of her there. She only wished this moment would come as late as possible, because Eleanor Vance had her plants. Who would take care of them? And in general, lately the woman especially valued life. She admired the white clouds. The warm sunshine made her happy. Even in these grey, leaden clouds that now covered the sky, she saw a special beauty, restrained and cold. Eleanor Vance caught her breath and walked on. Her path led to the shop. She deliberately chose a supermarket further from home. To get there, she had to walk through the park. The weather, of course, wasn't conducive to walks, and it was hard to move around. But without physical activity, the body might give up sooner. Doctors recommended daily walks, so she walked. She chose such a time, rush hour. People were walking quickly around her, returning from work. Some were rushing into shops, some to the kindergarten for their child. They lived as if in another time. They hurried, bustled. Eleanor Vance, however, could afford to walk at a leisurely pace and admire the scenery. And yet, she too had once hurried, rushed, hastened, just like all this young people. And suddenly, a hunched figure on a park bench caught her attention. The sensitive woman immediately understood. Someone was in trouble. She approached closer, looked carefully. Sitting on the bench was a very young woman, dark-skinned, black-eyed. Her clothes were old, cheap. She held a bundle in her arms. Babies like that are discharged from the maternity hospital. She was rocking the bundle and crying. Yes, crying. Real tears streamed down her cheeks. Nobody noticed these tears. People hurried past on their business. They didn't even pay attention to the young woman on the bench. And even if someone's gaze had swept over her, they still wouldn't have seen the tears. The stranger with the baby was sitting half-turned, with her back to the main path. Perhaps she didn't want to be seen in such a state. Eleanor Vance understood that now she definitely couldn't leave. The young woman looked to be just over 20, and a baby in her arms. She couldn't just leave her in trouble. The elderly woman hesitated for a long time before speaking. It felt awkward to bother people with questions. Who knew how this young woman would perceive her attention? But Eleanor Vance saw no other option for herself. "Hello," the elderly woman said, sitting down next to her on the bench. "Forgive my curiosity, but what has happened to you? Can I help in any way?" The young woman turned her tear-stained face. Surprise was visible in her burning black eyes. She clearly hadn't expected sympathy. "Thank you," the young woman replied politely. "But I doubt you can help. My situation is hopeless." "That's not true. There's always a way out. I'm telling you this from the height of my years. It's not true that there's no way out." Eleanor Vance smiled warmly. It is, I would tell you, but the story is long and not very pleasant. You're probably in a hurry? If there's one thing I have plenty of, it's free time, Eleanor Vance countered. And I just love all sorts of life stories. And what time is it now? The young woman suddenly perked up. Almost 6. Kindergarten is open until 7, so I still have an hour. If you have time, then listen. Karina was born in a Roma camp. She and her mother were treated dismissively. Karina was punished in different ways. She always got the worst of it. As she got older, she understood. Her mother was an outsider here. 70 years ago, a young woman ran away with her beloved to the camp. Karina's grandmother, her father's mother, adored her granddaughter no matter what. Karina was the only girl among her grandmother's son's children, long awaited. Finally, the elderly woman used to say, the one to whom I can pass on my gift has been born. Her grandmother never hurt Karina. They often talked, walked together through the meadows and steppes where the camp stopped. Her grandmother showed her granddaughter medicinal plants, told her about their power, and often held the girl's hand. During this time, Karina felt warmth transferring from her grandmother to her. The Roma said that this was how old Esmeralda was passing on her gift to the girl, little by little, despite the fact that a priceless gift was being received by an outsider. Yes, Karina was called an outsider in the camp, although she had lived among these people since birth. Needless to say, the attitude towards the girl's mother was much colder. Karina remembered her mother as a silent and indifferent, beautiful woman. Her father, having brought her down to the camp, quickly grew cold. The pressure from the people played a role. He had long since taken a new wife, who had borne him 3 sons. And Karina and her mother lived with her grandmother. Esmeralda loved her granddaughter and spent a lot of time with her. But she kept Karina's mother more like a servant, a voiceless one. At least, the old woman didn't pity her daughter-in-law. For as long as she could remember, Karina always felt pity for her mother. Even as a small child, she understood. Something had broken this beautiful young woman. External circumstances had turned her into a weak-willed, indifferent person. Mother. Even her own daughter didn't concern her. She existed in her own world, like an enchanted princess. She carried out her grandmother's errands like a robot, mechanically. She spoke little, only when necessary. And she never, never hugged Karina. And she so wanted to feel a mother's embrace, to see tenderness and love in her eyes, or at least interest. Her grandmother didn't love her mother, but this feeling wasn't the main one. Esmeralda gave her shelter, food, clothing, and she tried to cure her mother, to bring her back to a full life. Karina saw this. Esmeralda gave the young woman infusions, read incomprehensible spells over her. The girl hoped it would work, but her mother remained the same, cold, detached, indifferent. My strength isn't enough, her grandmother sometimes lamented. Deep in her soul, sorrow, longing sits. No one ever loved her. That's terrible, you understand? It cripples the soul. That's why your mother couldn't bear it. But I love her, Karina exclaimed. That's what gives hope. Perhaps all is not lost. And also, grandmother sees your gift. A little more, and when it fully passes to Karina, it will blossom with new strength. You will be stronger than me. The old woman smiled, stroking her granddaughter's hair. They, all these Roma who don't accept you now, will fawn over you, beg you to save them or their children from illnesses. With various skills, much can be remedied with herbs and infusions. Only turn to the gift in serious cases. It's not a toy. You'll understand when you grow up. And then, one day, when Karina was 11, her mother suddenly fell ill. She was as quiet, unemotional, and absent as always. She lay down for a week, and in the morning she didn't get up. She lay quiet, pale, detached, and breathed heavily. Her grandmother became worried, took out potions and old books, and sent Karina outside. The girl sat near the wagon, leaning her back against it, and prayed with all her might that her grandmother would manage to pull her mother through. Only her inner intuition told her it wouldn't work. And so it happened. Karina sat outside for about 3 hours, and then her grandmother came out. From her sad face, the girl immediately understood everything. Mother was no more. Karina took the loss hard. Yes, her mother had never shown feelings, but even her presence gave her strength. And most importantly, hope lived in the girl's heart. Hope that someday everything would change. Mother would wake up, the spell would break. She would smile, hug her daughter, and another life would begin. Happy, bright, warm. Her grandmother supported her granddaughter as best she could, tried to understand what the child was feeling. 2 years passed, and then one morning, Esmeralda sat Karina down in front of her, warning her that the conversation would be serious. "I had a dream today," her grandmother began. "Not a simple dream. I understood that I would soon be gone." "No, grandmother," Karina exclaimed. After her mother's passing, her worst fear became losing her grandmother, because then she would be completely alone. Her father had forgotten about her existence. He lived with his new family. The other Roma didn't accept Karina either. Only grandmother. Only she truly loved Karina. May grandmother stop saying such things. "Karina, you must understand. It must be this way. It's how things are. Give me your hand. I will pass on my gift to you completely. I no longer need it." Karina obediently held out her palm. Her grandmother squeezed it with her dry, thin hand, and the girl felt the familiar warmth flowing from her grandmother to her. A pleasant feeling. But this time it was scary. Grandmother is never wrong. "What will I do without you?" "I know, dear. You're scared." Her grandmother stroked her granddaughter's head. She looked with inexpressible sadness. It was clear that she also didn't want to leave the girl without support. Without her, Karina was weak and vulnerable. You were never truly accepted here. "Listen carefully. When I am gone, leave the camp. Otherwise, they will make a servant out of you, wear you out with physical labor. Your gift should serve good people. It was given to save people. So as soon as I am gone, go. At night. It's warm. Good. You'll easily reach the town. Any town that is nearby. Ask people where a shelter, an orphanage is, and go there yourself. Ask as a child. They won't refuse. You'll be among strangers, but at least warm and fed. You'll grow up, become stronger." Karina watched her grandmother closely, looking for signs of illness. But she looked as usual, cheerful, lively, quick. The girl began to think that her grandmother was mistaken, or that the terrible thing wouldn't happen any time soon. But one morning, her grandmother didn't get up. Karina, already knowing what was happening, slowly approached the person she loved and made sure that her grandmother was no longer here, but very, very far away. Only her body remained here. The girl sobbed loudly. She cried for a long time, shuddering convulsively, but after that, her heart felt lighter. Then Karina sat down on the floor by her grandmother's bed and thought hard. Grandmother is gone. I need to leave. And it's better right now, before any of the adults find out and stop me. Karina understood. She was not loved here because she was an outsider. Some were hostile. Only her grandmother held them back. She had great authority in the camp. She helped the Roma get rid of toothaches, calmed migraines. Because of this, they tolerated her granddaughter. And now, her protector was gone. It was time to follow her grandmother's advice, to run. Karina knew the town wasn't far. The evening before, they had driven past a nice, cozy town. Karina admired its lights, the towers and houses visible in the distance. Not a metropolis, but not a tiny town either. There were definitely children's shelters there, more than one, so that's where Karina needed to go. The girl quickly packed her few belongings into a backpack and, unnoticed by anyone, left the camp. She walked for a long time along a country road among wide fields, making her way towards the town. The unknown both frightened and fascinated her. Tears streamed down her cheeks from the abundance of emotions. She didn't wipe them away. Nobody would see anyway. To herself, Karina seemed tiny, insignificant, weak. But the girl knew. Somewhere inside sat a powerful gift. It wouldn't let her perish. It would help. Finally, she reached the town, asked for directions to the orphanage, found the institution, opened the door, asked to be shown to the director. A strict lady in glasses listened carefully to her story. It was a prepared story, which also contained a measure of truth. Karina said she was born and raised in a camp. She didn't specify that she was only half Roma. Her parents died. The Roma turned her into a servant. A widower threatened to take her as his wife. She ran away from a hard life, chose a different path. She didn't want to live in the camp. She dreamed of studying, getting a profession. It was difficult, but somehow Karina was registered. Documents were made. The girl took a long time to get used to the new life. Everything was different here. It was confusing. High beds, clean linen, different clothes, food, strict routine, studying. Karina liked to study. She needed to catch up on a lot, so she dedicated. At first, here too, she was treated as an outsider. Of course, exotic appearance, unusual story, but it wasn't contempt, it was interest. In the first few months, she had to tell her story dozens of times. She even became a local celebrity. Then, life settled into a routine. Karina finished 9 grades, trained as a commodity expert, celebrated her 18th birthday, graduated from the orphanage. She received a small apartment from the state, got a job. Not in her profession. She needed experience. But where could a college graduate get it? She worked at the checkout in the supermarket. The pay was decent. In short, Karina felt happy and, most importantly, normal, not second-rate, as in the camp. A full-fledged person. She perceived her past life as a fairy tale. Much seemed like fiction. For example, her grandmother's gift. Time passed, but the superpower didn't manifest. Karina decided it had all been her imagination. There was no such thing. One day, renovations started at the supermarket, and employees who weren't serving customers took turns watching the workers. During one shift, Karina met a nice guy. Tall, lean, athletic. Fair hair, light blue eyes, handsome look, open smile. The guy immediately showed interest, winked cheerfully. The young woman smiled back. Guys had approached her before to get acquainted. Karina's appearance was striking, she knew that. But things never went beyond a couple of dates. The suitors were disappointing. But with Andrew, everything was different. A strong, warm feeling was born at first sight. Karina understood immediately. They didn't date for long. After a few dates, they decided to live together in Karina's apartment. Andrew wasn't local. He was born in a large family in a village. He worked on a construction site, toiled hard. He dreamed of a house. For now, he was living in rented accommodation. Andrew took on all the men's work around the house. He re-glued wallpaper, fixed the curtain rod, repaired the wardrobe. And he also cooked wonderfully. It seemed there was nothing Andrew couldn't do. Life had taught him everything. They were happy, warm, and cozy together. They understood each other with hardly a word. Finally, Karina felt happy and loved. She hadn't even dreamed of such a relationship. Andrew and Karina got married. Soon the young wife realized she was pregnant. Their joy knew no bounds. She wasn't afraid that there would be more responsibilities. Everything was great. A roof over their heads, comfort, as Andrew earned well. A son, Theodore, was born, their first child. Andrew chose the name. It was the name of his grandfather, a kind and hard-working man. 18 months later, a daughter, Catherine, arrived. Karina named her after her own mother. The chores of caring for the little ones, household tasks, all this delighted and captivated Karina. She enjoyed the role of wife and mother. Yes, at times it was difficult, but all for the sake of her loved ones. For her husband, reliable Andrew, for Theo and Katie, who were so sweet. The little ones started kindergarten. It became easier. Karina started getting ready for work, decided to return from her second maternity leave early. The couple had ambitious plans. They dreamed of expanding, turning their one-room apartment into a 2- or 3-room one, and then thinking about a house. More space. It was getting cramped for such a large family. And then Karina realized she was pregnant again. She was scared. They hadn't planned a large family so soon, and it wasn't the right time. Andrew supported her, calmed her down, assured her that everything would be all right. "I'll just work more, that's all. There are plenty of opportunities for extra work on the construction site." Tragedy struck when Karina was in her last month before the birth of their youngest daughter. There was very little time left. That morning, she didn't want to let her husband go. A vague premonition tormented her. Karina pushed away the bad thoughts, explained it by her condition. It was late term. And just 2 hours later, Karina received a call with terrible news. Andrew had been crushed by a concrete block at the construction site. They couldn't save him. Karina sobbed, wailed like a wounded animal. The children were at kindergarten. She could give vent to her feelings. She cursed fate, called Andrew back. And then she suddenly felt his presence, unexplained. She just knew Andrew was here. He saw her, wanted to comfort her, but couldn't. And it hurt him. Karina pulled herself together, said aloud that she loved Andrew very much, realizing that she wouldn't have another chance to be heard, and that now she needed to be strong for their children. "You can rest easy about us. I'll manage." And Karina tried. She tried very hard to be strong, although at times it was unbearable. Due to stress, labor started prematurely. She had to leave the children with the neighbors. Where else could she put them? Originally, it was planned that Andrew would take time off while she was in the maternity hospital. But fate twisted things. The girl was born small, but strong, viable. Karina named her Anna. That's what Andrew wanted. And the young woman was left with 3 small children, without support. Karina applied for all the benefits, but there wasn't enough money. The children grew quickly. They needed clothes, shoes, and also, they were often ill. She had to leave fabulous sums in the pharmacies. What could she do? Health comes first. This is where her gift would have been useful. If only she could rid the little ones of colds. but the gift was dormant. Or maybe it wasn't there. Money was very scarce, and Karina took a step that seemed like a fatal mistake. She took out a loan. The money the family needed was in her hands instantly. Karina bought groceries, medicine, updated their wardrobe. But the amount had to be repaid with high interest. At first, Karina paid the debt regularly. Then the children got sick again. She had to pay a fortune for treatment, and Karina missed a payment. High interest started accumulating. The debt grew at a frantic pace. A common scheme. Collectors started bothering her. Karina couldn't go back to work. Little Anna was too small. You couldn't leave her even for a couple of hours to wash the stairwell. In short, she lost her apartment. It was taken for debts, as she had taken the loan against the property. Karina clutched her head. Where to go with 3 little ones? What had she done? Neighbours advised her to register at a shelter. She could live there for about 3 months. They give you time to find a job, get settled. But what could Karina do? Who would hire a woman with 3 children, one of whom was an infant? How could she work if she couldn't leave Anna, and the older ones were sick and not attending kindergarten? Well, that's my whole story. Of course, in a week, I couldn't find either a job or an apartment. How could I? I have little Anna. Where would she go? And what now? Gasped the former teacher. Karina's story was incredible. At times it resembled a fairy tale. But this wasn't a movie, it was life. And the young woman with 3 little ones had nowhere to go. How terrible. They'll be taken to an orphanage, they'll grow up within institutional walls, only with a living mother who is so insignificant that she can't provide normal conditions. Saying this, Karina started crying again, quietly, unnoticed. But Eleanor Vance saw everything and understood what a desperate situation the young woman was in. "Here's what," the old woman said decisively. "Move in with me." It was a strange, risky offer to invite an unknown family into her home. Eleanor Vance knew the neighbours would judge, but she didn't care. Karina and her children needed help. If she didn't extend a hand now, the little ones would go to an orphanage and their mother onto the street. 4 broken destinies. Eleanor Vance had nothing. She was living out her days. And Eleanor Vance would do this, even at a risk to herself. What was there to lose? Karina didn't believe it at first. "And your relatives? Will they object?" "No, I have no one." Eleanor Vance placed a hand on Karina's shoulder. "Let's go to the kindergarten for your little ones. Then we'll stop by the shop. We need to buy something for supper. After all, I have guests now." With each passing day, Eleanor Vance rejoiced more and more about the chance meeting with the young woman in the park. Karina turned out to be a pleasant, kind person, hard-working, grateful, sensitive. And her little ones. Eleanor Vance's heart melted when she watched them. Serious Theodore, chatty Katie, plump, bright little Anna. Eleanor Vance baked them pancakes and pies, feeling like a grandmother. The feeling was so pleasant, it was indescribable. Eleanor Vance and Karina often had heartfelt conversations. They both needed this warmth, care, attention, the absence of the feeling of loneliness and uselessness. Complete strangers in a few weeks. So she had to tell Karina about her diagnosis. If only I had that gift. She shook her head bitterly. Time passed. Eleanor Vance's condition worsened. Naturally. The doctors had warned her. It was time to move to a hospice, under the care of medical professionals. Karina saw Eleanor Vance off with tears, all in the ambulance. Although the elderly woman tried to dissuade her from the troublesome step, after all, she still had to return home with tiny little Anna. Eleanor Vance had taken care of Karina beforehand. She had willed her the apartment. Neighbours, of course, gossiped. "She'll off you to get the apartment, poison you, or come up with something else." But Eleanor Vance was sure about Karina. You couldn't fake that. The elderly woman was a good judge of character. Karina had truly become attached to her and was very afraid of losing her. She spoke about it, even cried. "What is happening? Why do all my loved ones leave? Why am I always left alone?" Karina, upon learning of the terrible diagnosis, broke down and sobbed, genuinely. Eleanor Vance comforted her, promised that everything would be all right. Karina later apologized for her weakness. The hospice was quiet, peaceful, cozy. Kind doctors, high doses of medication to relieve the pain. Eleanor Vance spent her time half asleep. Her head felt light, her soul was calm. Karina visited her often, placed her palm on her forehead, looked attentively into her eyes. After she left, Eleanor Vance felt better, more cheerful, strength returned. Perhaps from the feeling that someone needed her, someone worried about her, cared for her. Several weeks passed. To her surprise, Eleanor Vance felt better. She had the strength to walk in the hospital garden. She admired the flowers again, the blue sky, enjoyed fate's farewell gift. There might not be another such improvement. Strangely enough, her tests also improved. The doctors were surprised, but said that this happens, a calm before the decisive blow. Eleanor Vance suddenly had a strong desire to be home one more time, to see Karina and the little ones, to breathe in the familiar scent of the apartment, to take something as a keepsake. The locket, the one Kathy had given her, a memorable item with a story. It would be good to have it here, in the hospice, as a reminder of home, of her past life. Eleanor Vance asked the doctor for permission. He gave his consent. Eleanor Vance called a taxi and left. It was so amazing. She hadn't thought she would ever leave the hospice walls alive. It wasn't a recovery, of course, not deliverance from the illness. But not feeling pain, having the ability to go wherever her heart desired. There was strength in her legs and arms, lightness throughout her body. Eleanor Vance opened the door with her key. The apartment was quiet and empty. Understandable. Karina was out walking with Anna. The little ones were at kindergarten. Eleanor Vance walked through the familiar rooms, touched her favorite things, the rocking chair, the teddy bear Victor had once won, the soft blanket. Here was the bedside table with the drawer where her jewelry lay. She wasn't interested in the expensive necklaces. She came for the locket. She found the desired item, opened it, admired Kathy's cheerful face. Where is she now? Then a sound was heard. Eleanor Vance hurried to meet it. You're home, gasped Karina. She sat little Anna down, approached Eleanor Vance. There was joy and surprise in her eyes. Yes, well, I felt better. They let me go for a little while. Felt better? Karina smiled. Really? Did it really work? What worked? Eleanor Vance didn't understand. It's all my gift, you see. I was worried about you. I didn't want to lose another loved one. I've already had so many losses. I even cried when the children weren't looking. And one day I had a dream. My grandmother, Esmeralda the Roma. She sternly told me that I should stop crying, that it was time to manifest my gift. Yes, grandmother said it would be difficult, and it had cost her a great deal of effort. And it would all be in vain if I didn't pull you through. And I did it. I awakened the strength within me. I think grandmother helped too. Eleanor Vance blinked her eyes in confusion. Well, I'll be. Is it really true? And then she remembered how much easier she felt after Karina's visits, how warm her hands were. Not just warm. She thought then that it was her imagination because of the illness. What do the doctors say? Karina herself didn't fully believe in the miracle. Well, they said the tests improved, but it could be the calm before the storm. There will be no storm! Karina smiled broadly, hugged Eleanor Vance tightly. The storm is cancelled. My gift has awakened. It awakened to save you, you see? You don't believe it? You'll see. Everything will be all right. Karina threw up her hands in an excess of emotion. Her coal-black eyes shone with joy. Little Anna didn't understand anything, but she sensed that something good was happening, and she smiled too. Oh, what's that in your hands? Karina finally noticed the locket. What an interesting thing. I feel it has a special energy. Warm, good. It's a gift from one of my students. Former, of course. It was a long time ago. Eleanor Vance still couldn't process what Karina had said. So, the imminent end is cancelled? She'll live longer? And now she especially wanted to live. And there were the little ones, who loved her so much and needed her. She wanted to see them grow up. She wanted to support them on their difficult path. Life is not easy. People need help, support, understanding, love. Meanwhile, Karina turned the locket in her hands. Something about it caught her attention. Finally, she pried open the lid with her fingernail. A surprised gasp was heard. Karina covered her mouth with her hand. It's my mother, the woman finally said, pointing to Kathy's photo. She's younger here, but it's definitely her. I recognize her. It can't be. Eleanor Vance hadn't recovered from one shock when another hit her. Things like this just don't happen. It turns out they do. It's definitely Mother. Her eyes, her lips, her nose. I remember her face in the minutest detail. What was your mother's name? Kathy. I named my elder daughter after her. Of course. How did I not guess right away? And my student was named Kathy. She disappeared as a teenager. I didn't help her. I didn't understand in time. She ran away to a camp with a Roma man, and then she gave birth to me. Incredible. I couldn't help Kathy, but I helped her daughter. And you, in turn, saved me. All this was yet to be processed. But at that moment, Eleanor Vance was finally convinced. The illness had retreated, and she now had life.